Why don't you come on down to Mantiques and meet some friends of mine?
All right. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Live at Mantiques with me, Diego. My guest this week is the best-dressed man in blues, Mr. Bob Stannard. Welcome.
Well, nice to see you, Diego. Thanks for inviting me to get out of the house and sail on down to Massachusetts.
Yeah. I mean, I find you very inspiring, so I had to have you on the show. It was a requirement to have you on this show.
Well, that's terribly kind of you. Most people don't find me flattering. They have other words they use other than flattering, but I'll take flattering. That's good. Yeah, that's good.
All right. So, let's just kick this off.
What's on your mind?
Well, I mean, I've known you for a while, but I don't really know how you got started in music. So, how did you get started?
Well, my mother was a concert pianist and an opera singer when she was young. She auditioned at Carnegie Hall at the age of 14. She was a great pianist and had a tremendous voice. And she married a redneck woodchuck plumber from Dorset, Vermont. And there goes that career in music. But she always kind of wanted to have one of her three boys be musical. So at 6 years old, she wanted me to play the piano. And I took piano lessons from the time I was 6 to 11, and I hated every note I played because I had to play the piano. And it's probably the only regret I've carried with me is that I didn't stick with that instrument because it's a great instrument. At the age of 11, I had had enough of the piano, and I said, well, if you'd like me to play something, I'm your guy. And I went out and got some drums.
Sweet.
And I played drums every day until my dad came home because he was having none of the drum thing.
Drums are where it's at.
Drums are where it's at. You're a drummer. Yeah, and that's kind of where I started. I played drums until I was 18. In 1969, I went to Castleton College. I brought my kit with me. I set it up in the dorm, and I played one time. And the dorm parent flies upstairs to the third floor and looks at me and says, "What are you doing?" And I thought it was pretty obvious. I'm playing my drums. And he says, "If you do that one more time, you and your drums are going to Vietnam." 69, let's not forget the year. So I said, well, I didn't really want to do that. I brought my kit home, and I said, well, that's not working. And I went to Reed's Music Store in Rutland, Vermont. I bought a seat. I was looking for something else to play. Obviously, I couldn't play drums in my dorm. And I bought a C Marine Band harmonica. I had no idea how to play it, but I said, at least I can just carry it around.
Yeah.
And so I played for 35 years. Think about that.
Yeah.
That's like 10 times older than you.
Maybe 11.
Maybe 11. Picking the needle up and putting it on the record and stopping it and picking it up and listening and trying to figure out what guys like Charlie Musselwhite and Paul Butterfield and the likes, Little Walter, were playing. And after 35 years of being self-taught, I ran into Jerry Portnoy, who was Muddy Waters' last harmonica player, in a bar in Massachusetts down in Hyannis. And much to my utter amazement, he agreed to work with me. Sweet. And after 35 years of playing, he said, play something, and I played something horrible. And he says, stop, you have no idea what you're doing. And I said, ouch.
Yeah.
I owe a lot of my harmonica playing to Jerry Portnoy. Jerry Portnoy is a very tough guy to learn from, but he's the best teacher in the world. He's also one of the best harmonica players in the world. So that was very fortunate. And since then, I've taken lessons from Mark Hummel and people like that. And you're never too old to learn. I mean, you think after 35 years, you wouldn't really need to start taking lessons. But since I was self-taught, that means I taught myself a lot of wrong things to do. So I'm still trying. I figured, I'm going to be 70 in 3 months, and I'm dangerously close to understanding this instrument. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer.
Very close. Yeah. When I think of you as like the out of the harmonica players I know, which is like two or three.
Yeah, okay.
You are definitely the best.
Well, good. Let's hope you don't meet a fourth.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And so I generally think of you as a blues cat. So how did you get into the blues?
If you're playing harmonica, pretty much all you're going to play is blues, or you're going to be a country player.
Yeah.
And one of the first albums I ever got was Charlie Musselwhite's Memphis album, which I ended up a few years ago when I played with him at the Iron Horse in Massachusetts. I brought that album with me. And,
Sweet.
I asked him to sign it, and he says, he looks at it and he goes, "Who's that young guy?" So, I mean, it was just a natural thing. I should back up, though. When I was still a drummer, when I was 14 years old, I live in Manchester, Vermont, which is just north of here, about 50 miles. And, Vermont is Vermont. And back in the early 60s, it was kind of like it is today. It's the whitest state in the country. And the only black people that I was introduced to were the people that worked at the Equinox Hotel. And they were dressed in these beautiful white outfits with gold buttons and epaulets and captain's hats. And it was just like, wow, this is pretty awesome looking human. And I befriended the main maitre d' of the hotel, who invited me to come down after work and hang out, which I'm 14 now. So it's summertime. I couldn't tell my parents what I was doing, so I snuck out my bedroom window. I hopped on my one-speed bike. I pedaled 3 miles to the hotel where they stayed, and at night, after they were done working, we were in this hideous accommodations across the street. Everybody's sleeping in one room. They're all in T-shirts and ratty clothes, and I'm like, wow, this is a very different visual than I had this morning. Yeah. And they were all playing some music. And there was one guy who was playing a harmonica, and I was sort of thinking about harmonica, but I wasn't really playing at this time. And they were passing around a bottle of whiskey, and it came to me, and I didn't know what to do, and he take a swig. Yeah. So I took a swig of whiskey, and then another one. The ride home was slightly longer than the ride there. But that was a very interesting experience. I mean, I'm 14 years old. I'm hanging out with this room of probably 40 African Americans, and they're all having a really good time, and they're playing this music, and I'm like, well, I'm a Beatles guy at this point, okay? I'm 14, Beatles are happening, but I'm like, this is a little more of a magnet for me.
Yeah.
And then 4 years later, I get turned down on my drum career at college. I bought a harmonica, and I said, then I reverted back to that experience. And then I started, my former English teacher was a guy who had Toonerville Trolley down here.
Hal March?
Hal March?
Yeah.
You know Hal?
Yeah, I know Hal.
So Hal used to have Toonerville Trolley in a real trolley.
Yeah.
He used to drive around Vermont and Massachusetts and sell cut corner records for $1.69, which was about 69 cents more than I had. But still, I bought albums from him every week. And he would say to me, "What are you interested in?" I said, "I think I'm interested in blues." And he shoveled Sonny Boy Williamson's and Little Walters and all these great LPs. And I'm like, well, this is happening here. This is very much happening here. And boy, as they say, really the rest is history. I mean, after I graduated from high school, I get shot down on drums. I pick up a harmonica because I had this experience with Hal and with my friends at the Equinox Hotel. And I mean, I played for years just having no idea how to play this thing. And so I just picked up little pieces. There was a drunk on a bench in Burlington who was bending a note on a D harmonica. And I grabbed him by the shirt. And I said, "How are you doing that?" And he's like, "Oh, what are you talking about, man? That note, how did you bend that note?" So I pick up these little things along the way. 35 years later, I started getting a real teacher. So
Yeah.
it's a complicated instrument, you know.
Yeah, I feel like harmonica is like deceptively difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I've played a bit of like harp in the time I've been a musician, and I've been able to do like little things. I can blow on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you can breathe, you can play.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So if you're not breathing, then you have a medical emergency.
Yes.
And so the playing the harmonica is the least of your concerns, really.
Right.
And I was saying earlier to Joe, who runs this great place, when I've done some seminars, and I start off by asking how many people in the room can breathe. And there's usually somebody who's afraid to raise their hand. And of course, I suggest we call an ambulance. It's the easiest thing to play. If you play it blowing out and you play it breathing in. It's the only instrument. It's the only instrument that you play both ways. And you know, anybody can pick up a harmonica. And my granddaughter, 6 years old, does the same thing. Not quite as good as that, but then there's the nuance. Yeah. And there's the hidden notes, and there's the mysterious components to this thing, that's the part I'm still working on. Yeah. I'll get it by the time I'm 80, I'm pretty sure. That gives me another 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, 10 years is plenty, right?
If I'm still here. I'm hoping to be better at this in my next life.
Right. Yeah. And so I was talking to you the other day when I asked you to do this, and you mentioned playing with B.B. King.
Yeah.
Yeah. How is that?
How is that? How does a kid from South Dorset, Vermont, who is a decent but not great harmonica player, end up at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland playing with B.B. King and Joe Sample? Very quick short story. I was in the lawn mowing business in the 70s, and one of my customers was Barbara Riley Levin. Her husband was Jerry Levin, who created HBO, and he was chair of Time Warner. I had sold that business, and I had not seen Barbara in 25 years. That's a quarter of a century for you at home who are doing the math. And I ran into her 3 times in 1 week after not seeing her for a quarter of a century. Yeah. Third time, she invites me to a cocktail party at her house, which made me anxious because I'm not really in that crowd. Yeah. You know, a little over my head. But I said, well, we'll go. Well, her idea of a cocktail party was 150 people, caterers sent up here from Texas, a band from Nashville, Clint Bullard, and they live very near me, so I was on a dirt road, and I was not inhibited at the idea of having a handful of margaritas, and because you know I'm just around the corner from them, and one thing leads to another, and I end up on stage with this band. Clint Bullard is a country guy, and he's not a blues guy, so I said, well, you can just probably leave the stage, it'd be easier. So we had a little fight there, and he leaves the stage, he's mad. And the band was hip, they were all session players, and they were happy to diverge away from country stuff and play a little blues. So I do a little 1-4-5 key of A, rip it, and Barbara and Jerry are standing right in front of me. I get a call the next day from Barbara's person, who asked me if I had a band and would I be willing to play for the VIP sponsors for the B.B. King show that was coming up in 3 weeks. I didn't have a band, but I said I did.
I know that well. I've done that.
Every musician who gets a good gig who doesn't have a band finds a band. Yeah. I teamed up with a guy named Chris Kleeman who had a band. We played at the Equinox Pond in front of 100 people, and shortly into the set, I was asked if Barbara had a friend who played harmonica. Was it okay if he sat in with the band? What do I care? I'm having a good time. He plays a couple of songs, little short guy, white hair, not very good, but enthusiastic. And at the end, in a heavy French accent, he says, who here likes this band? Everybody clapped. He says, so do I. You'll get to hear them next summer in Montreux. Now, I thought he said Montreal. So during the break, I go up to the handler and I said, hey, how about that? I'm going to Montreal. And he goes, why? And I said, well, the little white-haired dude invited me to Montreal, and he goes, no, that's Claude Nobbs. He's the founder of the Montreux Jazz Festival. You're going to Switzerland. So I'm like, yeah, I knew that. That Montreal. Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah.
So moments later, a rather short individual wearing the coolest baseball jacket ever. It's a denim jacket, red leather across the back. It says B.B. King World Tour 2000. This is 2002. So I'm thinking he's a little small, but I could have the jacket tailored after I kill him and take that jacket, right? Because I had to have that coat. I didn't
Obviously.
get it. He hands me his card. He said, my name is Floyd Lieberman. I'm BB's manager, and I'd like to know if you'd be willing to play at his club in New York. B.B. King's in Times Square, right? So I'm like, well, yeah, maybe, but not in July, because I'm going to be going to Switzerland.
Yeah.
He says, here's my card. Moments later, Claude sees me talking to Floyd, so Claude comes back and said, could I ask you to do me a favor? I said, okay, you just invited me to the Montreux Jazz Festival, what do you need? He said, would you and just the guitar player, not the whole band, but just the two of you, be willing to join B.B. King tomorrow night after his set for a little jam? Now I'm looking around, I'm not a religious person, but at some point you do think, who is in charge here? This is kind of 3 miracles in a row, right? In 5 minutes. So I said to Claude, well, I got 3rd row seats, I kind of hate to give those up. And he goes, excuse me? I said, I'm just kidding. The next night, we find ourselves on stage, and the picture that you've seen of me playing with B.B. King was taken at that show. And that was Labor Day weekend in September. And the following summer, we did 4 nights. We did 4 shows with him, opened for him, and got to jam with him at his club in New York City. We were home for 10 days. We're on a plane going to Switzerland. We come back from Switzerland. I get a call from Floyd asking if we would play with him at the Foxwood Casino. And then we played with him again in Manchester, and then it dried up. I never got a call back. I called a couple of times saying, hey, it's me, the guy from Vermont, and that was that. But I did 9 shows with him.
That's awesome.
And it was amazing. And let me just say one thing very quickly. We're at Montreux. There were some other musicians that came out to play. And I was so mesmerized at being on a stage in front of 7,000 people with B.B. King and his band that I'm just kind of looking around, and next thing I know, all the chairs that they had lined up were filled. And I had no place to sit because I was slow on the uptake. And I'm standing there, and BB's like right here, and he knows me at this point because I just played with him. He looks at me and he goes, what are you doing, Bob? Geez, I'm without a heart attack. And I said, well, there's no place to sit. He says, sit on my amp. I said, I can't sit on your amp.
Yeah.
And he gave me that face, that B.B. King scowl, and he goes, I'm B.B. King. I'm telling you, sit on my amp. I want to keep an eye on you. So I am sitting on BB's amp right here. He's right there playing Lucille.
Oh.
And there was another harmonica player on stage as well who had harmonica-itis, who played constantly like he's the drummer. I don't do that. I play where there's a hole. So I'm just sitting there, and BB's looking at me. I'm not playing. And finally he says, take one. So he lets me go around like 3 times. I get done playing, 7,000 people erupt. It's a fantastic feeling.
Oh, yeah.
And B.B. King looked over me and paid me the best compliment I've ever had. And that was, he says, you don't play much, do you? And I said to him, that's the nicest thing anybody's ever said about my playing. And he erupted in this huge laugh, and everybody's trying to figure out, what did this guy with a beard do to make B.B. King laugh like that? He just was hysterical about the funniest thing in the world. Anyways, I was so fortunate. I had a really good relationship with him. Whenever I saw him, it was like, come on the bus, come hang out, have some food in the green room, and we would just hang out and talk. And he was the guy that you saw on stage was the guy in the green room. He was generous, worldly, very intelligent, and just the most gracious person. Quick one. We're on the bus with him. and I had my wife Allison with me at one point. And so we walk into the back of the bus, and Jerry Levin and Claude Knopf and all these people are there. And BB's nephew was sitting right next to him. And he says to his nephew, I can't remember his name, it was like Lester or something. He said, would you mind getting up and making a little space for this beautiful woman that's just walked in the room? My wife's looking around like, who else is here? And he goes like this, and he says, have a seat. And so he called me. My wife is not, she's the opposite of me, you know, and she's sort of like, wow, what's happening here? And she sits down, and he takes her hand with both hands and looks in her eyes and goes, hi, I'm B.B. King. What's your name? And she didn't have a name. She just was like butter. And he looks at me and he winks. And I said, oh, she's going home with him. There goes my wife. He was that kind of guy. He was so charming and such a sweet man. And I was supposed to see him in Rutland and in October of a few years back. And that was when he collapsed in Chicago and he never played again. So I missed my last chance to be with him, and I'm pretty sad about that. But I'm very grateful for the time and the experience that I had with him. It was just otherworldly, and it helped me obviously moving forward. I hand out my business card with me playing with B.B. King.
Right.
It's pretty easy to sit in with another band.
Yeah.
So, it was a very unbelievable experience. But I've had a lot of that, though. I mean, I've been very fortunate with this thing.
All right. I like to have interviews that have more than just the boring how you start questions. So let me ask you this. Yeah. Do you have an unbelievably bad gig experience that you would like to share?
I'm a musician that's been playing for 50 years. Is this a 3-hour show or no? Okay, I'll tell you quickly. I played a show, and I think it was in Glens Falls, New York. It was many years ago. I was a sideman in another band. We walk in, Patsy Cline's on the jukebox. Dead antler heads were all around the room, and it was an L-shaped room. Here was the bar, and here was the room where the band was set up, and we played this way, and the bar's over here. 97% of the patrons arrived by snowmobile. It was the end of January. It was 20 below zero. And as we're setting up, where the drummer would set up, as a drummer, you would appreciate this. Right behind the drummer were 3 bullet holes in the wall. So I said to the drummer, I hope you're better than the guy who was here previously. It was a very rough bar. We played 3 sets, and this is New York City, so you play until like 2 in the morning, 10 to 2, and no one came in the room where we were playing. They would come in and peek in the door and go, no, it's blues, I'm not listening to that. They were all Patsy Cline guys. It was just terrible. Nobody cared about us. They didn't like what we were doing. Somebody came in, asked if we could play Purple Haze. I said, it's not my gig, talk to the guitar player. But we got paid.
Yeah, that's the important part.
We got paid. But I said, make a note. That place is, that's a one-off. That's a one-off. Yeah, there's a lot of bad gigs out there, but I've actually been pretty lucky. I would say that most of my shows have been good shows, successful shows, but that particular show stands out. The bullet holes, the drunk in the bar who pinched the bartender, as she was walking by, and she didn't bat an eye. She spun 180 degrees and punched him in the mouth, knocked him off the bar stool.
That's great.
And so what do I look like, a piece of meat? I said, this is a really not the classiest gig ever. And one of the patrons asked for a margarita, which usually comes in a glass with salt around the edge. She says, turn around. And he goes, excuse me? He made him turn around, grabs him by the hair, pulls him over backwards over the bar, a shot of triple sec, tequila, and some lime juice, and stands him up and says, that's $3. she made the margarita in his mouth. And I said, well, okay. I would have used the glass,
right?
But like I said, this is a little different club than one that I'm used to. So I've evolved from those days to now I'm just doing theater gigs. I don't do bar shows anymore. I'm doing, and all the theater gigs, of course, have been canceled due to COVID. But and I'm actually considering retiring from music, from the band, on my 70th birthday, which is coming up in 3 months. But since I got shortchanged out of all my shows this past year, I may be forced into playing a little longer than I had anticipated.
Sweet. Then I can have you jam with me.
That's anytime. Anytime. That's not retirement. That's fun. Retirement is running a band. Ask your mom. It's that's tough. That's tough business.
Yeah.
Sitting in and doing cameos, I enjoy those immensely. That's an effortless thing for me to do. So I'll still do that.
All right. Well, speaking of jamming, would you like to jam on a tune?
I couldn't be happier.
All right. We'll be right back.
Nobody move.
All right. We're back. And we're going to play some music for you. What song are we playing?
Let me tee the crowd up. Okay, so this was a song written by a guy named Skip James in 1930, just as the Great Depression was kicking in big time. I heard this song about 2 years ago, and it seems to me as though that every day that goes by, this song becomes more relevant to the times that we're in today. Skip only recorded 18 songs. All of them were magic. This particular song has resonated with me, and I hope it resonates with you folks at home.
Hard times are here everywhere you go. Times living is hard before. People are drifting from door to door, but they ain't gonna find heaven. I don't care where they go. If I ever get up off this hard killing floor, I ain't ever gonna be this low no more. Well, you say you have plenty of money, but you better be sure all these hard times will kill you. They're gonna last so long. If you ever hear me singing this lonely old song, you're gonna know these hard times are just dragging on. Ooh, hard times are here and they're here to stay. Oh, how I wish these hard times
Hard times, man. We're in hard times. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to wear a mask. I want you to social distance. I want you to wash your hands. And when the time comes, get your shot. That's how we end the hard times that we're in today.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank Bob Stannard for being on my show.
I'd like to thank Diego for having me on his show.
Sweet. I'd like to thank Bob for thanking me for having.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
It's a real thrill, by the way. I've done a lot of cool things in my life, but this might be right up there in the top 10. This is a real thrill for me to be here. I told you before, I was honored to be asked to do this, and I'm not kidding. This is a nice thing to do, and it's a nice thing to do for me. Thank you very much.
You've got plenty more stories, so we might have to do a second installment at some point.
I ain't that far away.
Right. Awesome.
One cigar from here.
All right. All right. Thank you. Until next time. Ka-chow.
Why don't you come on down to Mantiques and meet some friends of mine?